The day my stepmom Victoria's 30-year secret came out was also the day my baby daughter became a millionaire. But let me start from the beginning. I'm Sophie Anderson, and for most of my life, I thought I knew my family story. My mother died when I was 2, and my father William remarried Victoria when I was 4. While Victoria never showed me the warmth of a true mother, she gave birth to my half-sister Grace a year later, and our family seemed complete. Victoria always made sure everyone knew that Grace was the real Anderson, while I was just the leftover from Dad's first marriage. "Remember, Sophie," she'd say whenever I achieved something, "Grace comes naturally to Grace. You have to work harder because, well, you understand." I did understand, all too well. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family event was a reminder that Grace was the golden child, and I was the afterthought. But Dad tried his best to balance things, even if he didn't always succeed. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he'd tell me privately after my achievements, though he never challenged Victoria's behavior publicly. I had very few memories of my mother, Anna, just a handful of photos and the stories Dad would share when Victoria wasn't around. Despite Victoria's attempts to push me aside, I excelled in school and eventually became a pediatric surgeon. Grace, meanwhile, lived off our father's wealth, jumping from one failed business venture to another. Victoria always had excuses for Grace's failures and explanations for why she needed more money. Then I met James, a fellow surgeon, and everything changed. We fell in love, got married, and soon were expecting our first child. Victoria was livid when Dad insisted on throwing us an elaborate baby shower. "It's not like she's giving you your first grandchild," Victoria had sneered. "Grace will give you proper Anderson heirs when she's ready." But Dad stood firm. "Sophie's child will be just as much my grandchild as any other." When our daughter Lily was born, Dad was overjoyed. He immediately set up a trust fund for her, just as he had done for Grace years ago. The amount, $5.3 million, was significant, but not unusual for our wealthy family. That's when Victoria's behavior turned from merely unpleasant to absolutely vicious. "Your brat doesn't deserve Anderson money," she'd snap whenever Lily was mentioned. "She's not even real family." I tried to ignore her comments for Dad's sake, but her attacks became more frequent and more vicious. Then came the day of the trust fund signing at our family lawyer's office. Victoria burst in just as we were reviewing the documents. "This is ridiculous," she screamed. "William, you can't give away Anderson money to some outsider's child." "Victoria," Dad said firmly, "Lily is my granddaughter." "Is she?" Victoria's voice dripped with venom. "How do we know Sophie is even yours? Her mother was probably running around with half the town before she conveniently died." The room fell silent. Even Victoria seemed shocked by her own words. Dad's face turned pale with anger. That's when the door opened again, and in walked Dr. Robert Chin, our family's longtime physician. He'd been semi-retired for years, but I recognized him from my childhood. "I hoped I'd never have to do this," he said quietly, holding a manila envelope. "But I can't let this injustice continue." Victoria's face went from red to white in an instant. "Bob, don't you dare." But Dr. Chin was already handing the envelope to my father. "William, there's something you need to know about 1993. Inside the envelope were 2 DNA tests. The first, dated 1993, showed that Grace, Victoria's real Anderson, shared no genetic markers with my father. The second, more recent, confirmed it. "Your wife came to me in 93, Dr. Chin explained, his voice heavy with old regret. "She was pregnant and needed to know if you were the father. When the test came back negative, she begged me to keep it quiet. I agreed, against my better judgment, because she claimed she'd been assaulted and didn't want to burden you with the truth." Dad's hands were shaking as he read the reports. "Victoria? Is this true?" Victoria's composure cracked. I didn't want to lose you. I knew you'd leave if you knew the truth." "The truth that you'd been unfaithful?" Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. "No," Victoria protested. "It wasn't like that. It was just one time with Richard." The name hit Dad like a physical blow. Richard had been his best friend, until he suddenly moved away in late 1993. Now we knew why. All these years, Dad whispered. All these years you've treated Sophie like an outsider, when she's my only true child. I felt dizzy. The implications were overwhelming. Grace, who had been held up as the real Anderson all these years, wasn't Dad's biological daughter at all. And Victoria had known this whole time, while treating me like the illegitimate one. I did it for our family. Victoria was crying now. Richard was nothing. I chose you. You chose my money, Dad corrected her coldly. And you've been letting Grace drain my accounts for years, knowing she had no right to it. Grace is still your daughter, Victoria protested. You raised her. Yes, I did. Dad's voice was firm. And I'll continue to be her father. But this ends now. The lies, the manipulation, the way you've treated Sophie. All of it. He turned to our lawyer. I want a full audit of all family accounts, especially Grace's trust fund. And I want my will updated immediately. Victoria lunged for the DNA test results, but Dr. Chin was quicker. I've kept copies, he said quietly. And I've carried this guilt for 30 years. It's time for the truth to come out. Why now? I asked him. After all this time? Dr. Chin looked at my sleeping daughter in her carrier. Because I watched Victoria tear you down for years, knowing you were William's only biological child. I couldn't bear to see it happen to another generation. The next few hours were a blur of legal discussions and emotional revelations. Dad discovered that Victoria had been funneling money from the family accounts into secret investments for years. Grace's trust fund had been repeatedly depleted and refilled, while Victoria had built up a substantial hidden nest egg. I was protecting our future, Victoria tried to explain. Making sure Grace would be taken care of, while treating my actual daughter like an unwanted houseguest, Dad replied. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Victoria's face crumpled. William, please. We can work this out. I'll be better to Sophie, I promise. But Dad had reached his limit. 30 years of lies. 30 years of watching you favor Grace, while belittling Sophie. 30 years of living with someone who could look me in the eye every day, while hiding something this huge. I'm done. I should have felt triumphant, but mostly I felt sad. Sad for Dad, who'd been deceived for so long. Sad for Grace, who was about to have her world turned upside down. Even sad for Victoria, who'd lived with this secret for so long it had poisoned everything it touched. The aftermath was as messy as you'd expect. Grace refused to believe the truth at first, but the DNA evidence was irrefutable. When she learned that her trust fund would be significantly reduced, though not eliminated because Dad still considered her his daughter, she went through stages of denial, rage, and finally, a kind of acceptance. I don't know who I am anymore, she told me during one of our rare honest conversations. Everything I thought about our family was a lie. You're still my sister, I told her. DNA doesn't change the fact that we grew up together. Victoria, faced with divorce and the collapse of her carefully constructed lies, tried everything to maintain her position. She threatened to go public with family secrets, tried to claim Dad had known about Grace's paternity all along, even attempted to challenge the validity of the DNA tests. Nothing worked. The divorce proceedings revealed the full extent of her financial manipulation. Millions had been diverted to private accounts, investment properties had been purchased in Grace's name, and elaborate schemes had been set up to hide the money trail. Dad, showing more grace than Victoria deserved, didn't press charges for the financial fraud. He even agreed to a reasonable settlement, though nothing close to what she'd hoped for. 30 years of marriage means something, he said, even if it was built on lies. Grace struggled with her new reality, but eventually began therapy to process everything. She moved out of the family mansion and, for the first time in her life, got a real job. Without Victoria's constant enabling, she started to develop a sense of responsibility. As for Lily's trust fund, it was not only secured but increased. Dad set up similar funds for any future grandchildren, regardless of their parentage. Family is about love and commitment, he declared, not just DNA. Dr. Chun retired fully after the revelation, saying he'd carried the burden of his silence long enough. Before he left, He gave me a box of old medical records that included detailed notes about my mother's pregnancy with me. "She loved you so much," he told me. "She made me promise to always look out for you if anything happened to her." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Victoria's attempt to protect her own daughter's inheritance had led to the exposure of her lies and the loss of everything she'd schemed to acquire. Her desperate grab for my daughter's trust fund had triggered the revelation that destroyed her carefully constructed world. A year has passed since that day in the lawyer's office. Dad has emerged from the divorce stronger and more engaged with life than I've ever seen him. He's a doting grandfather to Lily and has worked to rebuild his relationship with Grace, who is slowly finding her own path in life. Victoria lives in a condo across town, still maintaining that everything she did was for the good of the family. She sends birthday cards to Lily with checks that we return uncashed. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. I've had to reconsider everything I thought I knew about my childhood. All those times Victoria made me feel less than, all those comments about not being a real Anderson, they came from her own guilt and fear of discovery. Understanding this doesn't excuse her behavior, but it helps make sense of it. Grace and I are building a new kind of relationship, one based on honesty rather than Victoria's manipulations. She's becoming the aunt to Lily that she never was a sister to me, and there's something beautiful about watching that transformation. Dad spends every Sunday with us now, making up for all the times Victoria's presence kept him at a distance. He's full of stories about my mother, sharing memories he'd previously kept hidden to keep the peace with Victoria. Through his stories, I'm finally getting to know the woman who gave me life. Lily, now a toddler, will grow up knowing the true story of our family, not the sanitized version Victoria preserved for 30 years, but the messy, complicated reality. She'll know that family isn't just about DNA or trust funds or social status. It's about love, truth, and the courage to face reality, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The trust fund that sparked this revelation sits safely in an account for Lily's future. But the real inheritance she'll receive isn't the money. It's the truth about her family, the knowledge that integrity matters more than appearances, and the understanding that real love doesn't need to be propped up with lies. Sometimes I think about that day in the lawyer's office, about how Victoria's desperate attempt to deny my daughter her inheritance led to the unraveling of her own carefully constructed life. There's a lesson there about karma, about how the truth has a way of emerging when it's needed most. Dr. Chin sent me one final letter before moving to Florida for his retirement. In it, he included a photo I'd never seen before, my mother, pregnant with me, smiling radiantly at the camera. On the back, in his careful handwriting, was a note. Anna Anderson, 1991. The real Anderson heir. That photo sits on my dresser now, next to pictures of Lily and Dad, Grace and James. It's a reminder that family history isn't always what we think it is, but the truth, however long delayed, has a way of setting things right. Victoria's secret stayed hidden for 30 years, but in the end, it took just one afternoon for everything to change. Her desperate attempt to deny my daughter her inheritance led to the exposure of her own lies and the revelation that the child she'd treated as an outsider, was the only true Anderson heir all along. But the real victory wasn't about money or inheritance or even vindication. It was about truth, about healing, about building authentic relationships free from manipulation and lies. It was about learning that family isn't defined by DNA or trust funds, but by love, honesty, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how long it's been hidden. And Lily? She'll grow up knowing her true family history, understanding that while money can be inherited, integrity must be earned. That's a lesson worth far more than any trust fund. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Stay stunned.